Pope Benedict's impending visit to Britain is rarely out of the news. This weekend, the Foreign Office had to apologise after a leaked memo from junior officials preparing for the trip in September floated the idea of a Benedict brand of condoms and a papal visit to an abortion clinic. Critics have started a petition on the Downing Street website, which accuses the Pope of covering up child abuse by Catholic priests, a charge repeated by the media around the world. But what evidence is there that the Pope knew about abuse but failed to act?
There is a grave and serious problem, and all trails and responsibility for that leads directly to one place, that is the Vatican, that is to the Pontiff and his predecessors.
People get the sense from our secular press that Cardinal Ratzinger was directly responsible for this case and how it was handled. And you got to show proof of that. And, you know, I'm talking now more as a judge than anything else. I've not seen proof.
In the report this week, we travelled to the American state at the centre of abuse allegations to investigate these claims, speaking to some of the key players and deciphering what the mass of documents actually tells us. I've come to St. John the Evangelist Cathedral in Milwaukee in the state of Wisconsin, where Sunday morning Mass is just about to start. And this state is at the centre of allegations that are affecting the church worldwide. Numbers are down at Sunday Mass, and it's not surprising. The Catholic Church here has been vilified for ignoring warnings about a paedophile priest called Father Lawrence Murphy for over 20 years. But what's far more damaging for the Church are claims that the man at the top, Pope Benedict, knew about the Murphy case too, but did nothing about it. And to make matters worse, it's claimed he then blocked attempts to defrock the priest. It's a charge that many of the Catholic faithful here are unwilling to accept.
I sin every day, you sin every day. You're going to throw stones at somebody? Are you perfect?
Quite frankly, I think it's being made into a bigger deal than it needs to be.
I think that not as much information gets as high up as people usually think it does.
We've learned that they are human just like the rest of us.
Can you trust this person to be representing everything as he should?
So what do we know about the man at the centre of the abuse allegations here in Milwaukee? I've come to a very prosperous-looking school on the outskirts of the city. This used to be the St. John's School for the Deaf, and it was where Father Murphy worked and taught for over 20 years. He was a revered and charismatic figure here until he left in the mid-1970s.
That was my first communion.
How old are you there? 1960.
I was 10. That's me. That's Father Murphy.
There. In 1964, Murphy began abusing Steve Geyer, a 14-year-old member of the St. John's School basketball team. 30 years may have passed, but speaking through his interpreter, Steve vividly recalls how the attacks began.
We were supposed to have something called sex education. The next day, Father Murphy came over by me and he said, "You, come here." So he took me into a private room. It was upstairs in the dorms. He took me into the clothes closet. It looked like a confessional. Then he looked at me and he said, "I want to show you something." And he said, "Well, first take your pajamas off." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I don't need to do that." He goes, "No, it doesn't matter. I want to show you something."
No.
And I still said, "No, I'm not going to." And then he grabbed me. He grabbed my arms. He was shaking me. And then he pulled my pajama bottoms off. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. And I started crying. And he said, "You know that God wants me to teach you these things."
Did you try and tell anyone about it?
I did try to tell 3 other priests here in Madison. I tried to tell other adults in my life when I was young. I tried to tell the police. You know, a long time ago it was very, very difficult because, you know, the priests were so highly respected. Everybody believed the priests. You know, they said, "Oh, the church is the ultimate authority."
Murphy could have been stopped years before he attacked Steve. Back in the late 1950s, Father David Walsh raised concerns about Murphy with the then Milwaukee Archbishop, but nothing happened. Before he died, Father Walsh explained in an affidavit how he thought the matter important enough to bring it to the attention of the Pope's man in Washington, known as the Apostolic Delegate. As with many letters and documents in this programme, his words are voiced by an actor.
I was stationed in Chicago as chaplain of the deaf from 1955 to 1963. It was in the early part of that period that several deaf teenagers who attended the St. John's School in Milwaukee made some remarks that indicated that Father Murphy was taking advantage of them. I sought the advice of our moral professor and followed his advice to report the matter to the Apostolic Delegate in Washington. What may have happened, I do not know.
The Murphy case was reported to the police in Milwaukee, but he was never prosecuted. It was left to the church to deal with. In 1974, they called a meeting between deaf victims of Father Murphy and senior clergy. John Conway was there as an advocate for the deaf victims.
There were two clerics who were introduced as representatives of the Apostolic Delegate in Chicago and described as, in essence, the Vatican being represented at this meeting.
Did they talk or contribute at all?
No, not in the course of the entire meeting. They said nothing.
And what kind of detail was there then about the abuse?
Well, the depositions were very graphic. There were reports of him coming directly into the dorm and going up to kids and fondling them in the confessional, or he would have boys come to his room to have confession. But he would tell them, you cannot speak about anything that happens here, or you go to hell.
So I've just come from meeting John, and I've got a copy of one of these depositions that was presented to the church before this seminal meeting in 1974. And what's important about this document is that it clearly states in this testimony from the victim that he was sexually abused during confession with Father Murphy. Now, for those delegates who were there from the Vatican, that should have rung alarm bells, because in church law, offences connected with a confessional are incredibly serious. And they should have been referred to this doctrinal watchdog in Rome, known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith.
The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's the grandchild of the infamous Inquisition.
Tom Doyle is a Catholic priest, canon lawyer, and a critic of how the church has handled abuse cases.
Basically what this congregation does is it's a watchdog for doctrinal issues. It monitors theology texts, it monitors statements, it monitors teaching, anything to do with doctrine. And if they determine that the doctrine is unorthodox or dissenting, they swoop down and make a move on the individual. They also have handled, for many, many decades, cases of discipline involving especially sexual crimes, solicitation in the confessional, bestiality. That's where the case files are sent.
In 1974, the CDF only dealt with abuse cases if they involved the confessional. It was an aggravating offence under church law. Now, we emailed the papal ambassador in Washington. We wanted to find out if they knew about the case and if they had referred it to the CDF. We didn't hear anything back, so I called them, and I got put through to the papal ambassador, the nuncio. The phone rang for a very long time, and then his secretary came back on the line. She said, "His Excellency cannot answer the email," and that was that. So what does this have to do with the Pope? After all, the then Cardinal Ratzinger didn't arrive at the Vatican until 1981, when he became head of the CDF. When he did, there should have been a file in the CDF's archives with the reports about Murphy from the 1960s and 70s. And the Murphy case was to resurface when the Vatican was alerted about it again in 1995.
I cannot keep our secret about your life as a terrible molester at our school for many years. I must tell the truth about you and how you ruined mine and many other children's faith in God and Jesus.
This is an extract from a letter written to Father Murphy by one of his victims. It was sent to the Vatican in 1995, asking for Pope John Paul II to defrock Father Murphy. Crucially, it mentions how he used the confessional to select his victims.
I came to confession and you told me to pull down my pants. I will always feel the horror of that moment. Letting me believe it is not a sin if you are the one masturbating me. I would not go to hell because you are a priest.